The knock on the door wasn't a knock. It was the soft thud of a gloved fist testing a hinge, the whispery scrape of a shoe against waxed linoleum, and the almost tender click of a clipboard being set down just out of sight. The psychiatric transport team never barges in. They ooze. I lay in the hospital bed with paper-thin blankets tucked too neatly around my waist, watching shadows shiver under the door. The fluorescent lights hummed the way guilty people hum hymns. On the other side of the glass, my mother stood very still, head bowed as if in prayer, with that beatific look she practices only for other people's benefit. A nurse, the only one who believed me, had warned me, whatever happens, don't sign anything else. And check your phone's location. Someone's been tracking you. She'd vanished after that. Fired, I would learn, for boundary issues. The door opened. A friendly face leaned in. Friendly like a pamphlet. "Maria," the orderly said. "We're here to help you feel safe." Safe. I almost laughed. My mother's lawyer was behind them, his tie loose, a practiced frown of compassion pulled onto his face like a fresh pair of gloves. "This will be temporary," he told me. "Just 72 hours for everyone's peace of mind." I could hear my mother's voice through the glass panel. "She's been confused," she told a passing nurse. "Grieving. Fertility grief is a real thing, you know." My hands were steady. That was the first surprise. I expected them to shake the way they had last night when I watched her smile through a pane of glass, as if my life were a fish tank she'd arranged with plastic castle, bubbling filter, fake plant swaying. It's odd, the moments that define who you are. I thought mine would be in a courtroom or a protest line or a shelter lobby with a woman whispering, "Can I really say no?" But it turned out to be this, the inch between the transport gurney and my bed, and the decision not to give it up. And then, as if to punish the thought, my own mind hauled me backward. Back to breath counts and sandbags, to my mother's voice before it curdled into piety. "Again," she said. "Int 2, 3, 4. Up 2, 3, 4. I was 8. My sister Della was 10, and our mother had duct-taped 20 pounds of sand to each of our bellies. She said it would build character. Said real women didn't whine about back pain, they absorbed it into their purpose like the earth takes rain. On the TV, a woman screamed through a birth that was nobody's business but somehow also everyone's. My mother handed me a plastic doll with stiff, unblinking eyes and a Bluetooth chip that made it cry if you didn't hold it right. Della cradled hers with a reverence I couldn't copy. She named hers Miracle and Little Light and Promise. I named mine Quiet. By 16, Della asked if she could be a practice surrogate for one of my mother's coworkers. At 18, she signed a surrogacy contract, and my mom baked a cake with pink script frosting that said, "First gift." The frosting stained everyone's teeth the same candy color. I sat in a corner nursing a warm soda and pretended my skin didn't feel too tight. Such a waste of a perfectly good uterus. Mom would sigh about me, loud enough for neighbors and strangers and waiters to hear. Her sister has blessed 3 families while this one hoards fertility like some dragon sitting on a golden egg. She said hoards like a sin. She said fertility like a currency. She said my name like a court order. By Della's 4th pregnancy at 22, she limped. Her hair thinned in hanks like winter grass. She kept smiling, kept saying, "This is what I was made for," in a voice that trembled at the edges like heat above asphalt. When I tried to talk to her about rest, she took both my hands and pressed them to the rise of her stomach. "Don't blaspheme," she whispered. "My body is a vessel. You wouldn't tell a chalice to be something else." I learned a different kind of chalice. I hid LSAT prep books inside maternity magazines. I timed my studying to my mother's errands. In lecture halls far away, I learned the language of no. I spoke it on behalf of girls who'd never been taught it in their mother tongue. I specialized in reproductive rights and medical ethics, which is a polite way of saying I learned to untangle what love does when it's been twisted into a leash. By 28, my phone was a lifeline. Women whispering from bathroom stalls, from parking lots, from the sink of a family kitchen where a rosary hung from the faucet like an admonition. I thought I was building armor. But armor is still skin. It still feels the knife. The night it finally happened, I thought it was dinner. A celebration, my mother said, for Della's newest pregnancy. The dining room smelled like rosemary and a citrus cleaner that always burned my nose. My mother's table was set in her favorite theme, fertility harvest, which meant every centerpiece was a ceramic bowl of pomegranates and wheat sheaves, and the napkin rings were tiny silver storks. Della's belly was a taut hill, her cheeks bright with feverish joy. My mother kissed me twice, once on each cheek, as if she were blessing me. "I have a surprise," she trilled, stepping into the kitchen. She returned with a tray like a nurse in a pharmaceutical ad, white towels, shiny packages, a small glass bottle with a label my brain registered before my breath did. The syringe glinted. The liquid inside was clinical sunrise. Just a little boost to get those eggs flowing. "Mom," I said, stepping back. Della's hands landed softly on my upper arms, like a child at the edge of a pool encouraging a friend to jump. "Please," she said. "I've found the perfect couple. They've had 3 miscarriages. They cry when they talk about you, and they haven't even met you yet. You will not." I tried to pull away. My mother moved fast. She always has in crises of her own making. I saw other syringes laid out like options. I realized then what I'd known and ignored. They had been planning. The needle bit into my thigh. The burn made my vision pixelate, 1,000 tiny squares that didn't add up to my face, my life, my future. I heard my mother say to the phone, "Yes, we've started the protocol. She'll be ready for harvest in 2 weeks." Harvest. It was a word I'd heard her use about centerpieces and seasons and church bazaars. It tasted like metal in my mouth. Hyperstimulation isn't poetic. It's a biological tantrum. My body flooded itself and drowned me. I woke in ICU with a stomach like a drum and a nurse's hand on my wrist. The first thing my mother said when she was allowed in long enough to spit syllables, "We only brought you here to save your womb." The nurse pressed the red call button and security moved my mother out like a smudge being wiped. The nurse came back, her voice the first water I'd seen that didn't want to flood me. "I'm going to ask you some questions without your mother in the room," she said. I told her everything and then I told her more, the way you tell the truth once the cork is yanked out. She called security to ban my mother from my room, her hand steady on the phone. She wrapped her arms around me like a shield and whispered that she believed me, and then, like a woman who'd been watching too long, she said she knew this wasn't a single bad act. It was a pattern. "People talk," she said, "about that clinic." She promised to fetch someone who could help. Detective Rodriguez introduced himself with his badge in the light and his voice in the low register of someone who knows what it costs a person to speak. Domestic Violence Unit, specializing in reproductive coercion. He said the words like puzzle pieces he knew where to place. When I mentioned my mother worked as a receptionist at Blessed Beginnings, he looked down, jaw tightening. "We've had calls," he said. "We run into this problem. Everything looks voluntary on paper. Clean signatures. Friendly evaluations. Smiling photos." On the other side of the glass, my mother's face twisted into an expression I knew from childhood, the mask cracking to show the skull underneath. She mouthed something, overpronouncing each word so there could be no misunderstanding. "Ungrateful bitch." My phone lit up like a scored knight. Messages from Della. "How could you bring the police? Mom was helping you. All she ever wanted was for you to know the joy I've known. Joy like a chain being kissed." A social worker came in, hands shaking around a clipboard. "Maria Gonzalez," she said, flinching as she read my mother's name on the chart. "We've had interactions." She slipped pamphlets onto my lap as if they were contraband. When she left, a man in an expensive suit swept in on the tail of her fear. "Representing Patricia Gonzalez," he announced. "We're concerned about recent behavior. Hormone-induced psychosis is a recognized condition. For her safety and yours, we're requesting a psychiatric evaluation." Della appeared in the hall, radiating good intentions like heat. 5 of her children hung around her skirt like ornaments. She told anyone who would listen, "Aunt Maria has always been jealous. Aunt Maria needs help." Security arrived. My hospital turned into a stage. I was the villain in my own body. I asked to call my firm, needing someone to say my name and mean me. "Oh, Maria," the receptionist said. "We're handling your caseload while you recover. Your mother told us what you're going through." She used the word breakdown. I tried to steady my voice, but how do you steady a bridge that's been cut at both ends? My mentor texted. "Your mother's worried you're fixated on having a baby, but your body won't cooperate," she wrote. The speed of my mother's campaign was breathtaking. Decay doesn't move this fast. This was choreography. When they mentioned Dr. Margaret Whitfield, I nearly laughed. Of course. My mother's book club. Sandwiches and Chardonnay and paperbacks about brave women who learned their real purpose by page 2. Dr. Whitfield entered with pearls and pity, and a tablet that already seemed to know me. "Your mother told me how much you've struggled," she said. "Let's talk about your relationship with motherhood." We didn't talk. We performed. She asked questions with trapdoors and every answer I offered fell through. When I said I chose my career, she wrote defensive. When I mentioned my work helping women resist coercion, she wrote projection. When I said my mother injected me against my will, she wrote persecution complex with maternal figures. She showed me photos of baby dolls she said were found in my closet. "Regression is common," she cooed. I stared at the screen. I had never seen those dolls. The closet in that photo was my closet. The blanket cradling the smallest doll looked like one my grandmother knitted before she died. It would have smelled like cedar once. Now it smelled like evidence. "I'm recommending a 72-hour hold," she said at the end, and clicked something that felt like a cage. That's the part one keep returning to, the tiny stupid bureaucratic motions that build the trap. The check mark next to hold. The email my mother sent at 2:47 a.m. from my hacked account informing my firm that I'd be on indefinite leave to address personal health matters. The Instagram post Stella had already backdated. Photos of me with drooping eyes and worn smiles, captioned with prayers for my fertility journey. Della's video of me playing with her daughter, the text overlay, "She'll be a good mom when she stops fighting her calling." The past rewritten like a Wikipedia page at midnight. The way reality can be bleached and wrung and hung back up still damp and called clean. The psychiatric ward was a different kind of white. Not the white of bone, which is honest about being bone, but the white of correction fluid over a sentence, a lie insisting the truth beneath it doesn't matter. They took my shoelaces and my belt and my phone. They gave me paper scrubs that whispered when I moved. They told me no visitors except family for 24 hours, which is a funny sentence if you think about it. They called the rules safety. I called them leverage. My mother arrived with a suitcase and a nursery, maternity clothes, prenatal vitamins, a journal already filled with entries and handwriting that almost matched mine, photos labeled with names like your godson, a mobile with tiny elephants she hung on a bent paperclip above my bed, an ultrasound photo with next month's date, baby Gonzalez, printed in the corner. We've petitioned for temporary conservatorship, she said mildly, the way you might say you'd remembered to move the laundry from the washer to the dryer. Just until you can think clearly. Think clearly was the phrase they all used when they meant agree. That night, a different nurse slid into my room and handed me a number on a scrap of paper. Her eyes were gray and tired and furious. We're not all like her, she said, meaning Dr. Whitfield. Later I tore the paper into confetti and flushed it. The new therapist in group sat forward like he'd been waiting his whole life to say, sometimes care feels like control. The woman 2 chairs to the left stared straight ahead and said, sometimes control is control. He didn't write that down. I learned fast. The quickest way out was to become what they wanted to see. I practiced the face I'd watched on Della for years, soft in the middle, eyes tilted upward like the light was just out of frame. I said words that tasted like battery acid. I told Dr. Whitfield she'd help me see I'd been avoiding my true desires. I let my voice break when I apologized to my mother for resisting my calling. I wore the maternity dress my mother brought, smoothed fabric over a flat stomach and cradled the air. It felt like treason to my bones. It worked like a key. Impressive insight, Dr. Whitfield said, typing. I see no reason to continue the full hold if you're committed to outpatient work. Your mother has already scheduled a consultation at Blessed Beginnings tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow afternoon was also the conservatorship hearing. I asked for a computer under the pretense of researching success rates. I sent an email to a colleague who knew conservatorship law the way a locksmith knows locks, from the inside. I checked the court calendar, memorized the case number, wiped the browser history, and smiled at the nurse who hovered. They released me at 9 a.m. My mother tried to shepherd me directly from the hospital to the clinic. I'd like to change, I said sweetly. I want to look my best for the couple who'll raise my eggs. I felt evil saying it. That's the thing about surviving people like my mother. They make you practice a version of yourself you don't want to meet in a mirror. At my apartment, she fussed with my bookshelf, replacing law texts with pregnancy guides as if they were just different editions of the same truth. In the bathroom, I called my colleague. I can't be in 2 places at once, I whispered. File whatever you can. There's evidence in a folder labeled personal. My passwords, I gave them to her the way you give away your last match. The clinic was a terrarium for hope. Couples sat with clasped hands and braced jaws. Girls stared at their chins in the reflection of a silver trash can. My mother filled out forms with neat, precise letters. A nurse took my blood and a piece of my calm. At 2:15, I asked to use the bathroom and walked out the side exit into sunlight that felt illegal. I called a ride and rehearsed the most adult sentence I've ever said. I am here of my own free will. The judge had a voice that made sentences feel like walls. My mother had a tissue tucked in her sleeve like a weapon. Dr. Whitfield had a report that said I was in love with being sad. My colleague had subpoenas and an email chain and a timeline with weaponized timestamps. I had my voice and a throat that wanted to close. I said, my mother forged documents giving herself power of attorney in case of an emergency she was planning to create. She drugged me. She coordinated with a clinic where she works the front desk. She rebranded coercion as love and motherhood as consent and my resistance as illness. She does not get to rename me. The judge denied the conservatorship and granted a restraining order. For a moment, my body forgot to hold itself in. I stood there reframed by a sentence handed down from a bench, and I felt the earthquake a person feels when the ground finally decides to be ground again. Outside, Della waited in the heat, surrounded by children. Her belly was a planet she could no longer balance. How could you do this to her? She asked, eyes swollen. She meant Mom. She meant the woman who taught her to be useful like a spoon. I didn't do anything to her, I said. I did this for me. Her oldest, Emma, clutched her skirt and looked at me, measuring adult faces for the first time in her life, trying to tell which ones were masks. Why is Grandma crying? She asked. Because she lost something she thought she owned. I said, too tired to make it nice. There are always afters. The clinic was shut pending investigation. My mother tried to reach me through every available mouth. Family, church, strangers who wanted to be part of something sanctimonious. Della gave birth to her 6th child and nearly died. A doctor told her no more. I cried when I heard, not out of triumph but because loss is loss, even when it saves you. The nurse who'd helped me in ICU sent a message coded like weather. A group of women were collecting stories of coercion tied to Blessed Beginnings. Would I be willing to speak? I said yes and then canceled and then said yes again and then sat in my car outside the coffee shop where we were meeting, shaking, because what if telling it cemented it and made my life only this? The women at the table looked like lawyers and baristas and librarians and exhausted saints. We told the truth, and the room got warmer and then cooler and then steady, the way a body finds its temperature again after a fever breaks. James came back to my couch with a carefully neutral face. He'd watched Della's edited videos, read my mother's emails, listened to whispers. I almost believed her, he said. I almost walked away. She's very thorough. We sat with our knees touching and our shoulders not, like a newly drawn border. I told him I didn't know if I wanted to be with anyone right now. He said he didn't know either. We agreed to not know together. The relief of someone willing to share uncertainty felt like a shower after a funeral. My firm took me back. My clients, women who'd learned like me to carry their own names in their mouths like seeds, texted and called and cried. Some apologized for believing the first story they'd been given about me. I told them the apology wasn't necessary, but I took it anyway like a vitamin. Months scraped forward and I had the luxury of ordinary, which is what freedom feels like when you've been a museum exhibit for too long. I grocery shopped without checking over both shoulders. I slept through the night and woke up with my teeth unclenched. I bought a plant and it didn't die. I took up running and hated it and kept going because I wasn't performing for anyone. My mother sent a Christmas card to my office addressed to Maria, future mother, and I fed it to the shredder like confetti. One afternoon, an unknown number rang. I almost ignored it. Aunt Maria? A small voice said. It's Emma. I used Mom's phone while she was sleeping. Hi, sweetheart, I said, sitting down on my kitchen floor. Is everything okay? Grandma keeps saying when I'm older I can help families, she whispered, the way you whisper about monsters. She says I have a good body for it. You have a good body for being Emma, I said. For running and swimming and climbing and taking naps and saying no. There was a pause. The pause of a girl weighing whether it's allowed to laugh. I don't want to be like Mommy, she said. You don't have to be, I said. You can be anything. You can even be someone who doesn't know yet, and that counts too. Can I come see you? She asked. Mom says you're dangerous, but you don't sound dangerous. I'm not, I said. But we have to be careful. Ask your mom when she's feeling good. If she says no, we'll find safe ways to talk. We did. I became the aunt on the other end of the school office phone. I told Emma stories where the girl learns a different word for fate. At a family funeral that wasn't ours, Della and I looked at each other across a pew. For the first time in years, I saw my sister and not the alter she'd become. She didn't speak to me, but she didn't look away. Later, Emma hugged my waist in the parking lot, so fast it felt like a theft, whispered thank you, and ran back to her mother. A year out, a young woman approached me in a coffee shop and said my name the way you say the name of a place that was once on fire and is now a field. You helped my friend, she said. Her family wanted her to be a surrogate for her sister. She ran because of what you did. She told me she was supposed to start treatments next week. But I think I'll run too, she said, smiling a little like someone who discovered they still have legs. Call me if you need help, I said, giving her my card. After she left, I thought about cycles. How families braid their values into leashes and call them heirlooms. How it isn't a small thing to cut one and say, this won't be handed down. People call that betrayal. They call it ingratitude. They forget sometimes that gratitude is not an altar you're required to lie down upon. I still dream sometimes of the doll my mother made me breastfeed at 8 years old. In the dream, its eyes finally close. In the dream, I place it on a shelf and it learns to be quiet not because I've smothered it, but because it is no longer a weapon. The court case against Blessed Beginnings sprawled like a vine. The clinic rebranded, tried to shed its skin by changing signs and fonts. The women who had been helped discovered their own names for what happened to them. Dr. Whitfield's license bristled with complaints. Pearls don't protect you when the room starts listening. My mother became smaller in public and meaner in private. I kept the restraining order pinned to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon. On a Tuesday heavy with ordinary, I ran into the ICU nurse in a grocery store. We were both buying grapes. I recognized her hands first, then her eyes. It felt like seeing a lighthouse with all the bulbs on. We hugged in the produce aisle between apples and avocados, and I cried in a way that startled me. You were the first one who believed me, I said. She shook her head. No, she said. You were. I just said it out loud. When I tell this story now, people ask about forgiveness like it's a gate I'm required to pass through on my way to adulthood. I don't know what to say to them except that forgiveness is not a synonym for permission. I have forgiven the person I had to be to survive my mother. The liar. The actress. The woman who smiled through bile and wore a dress like a disguise and asked questions she never wanted answered just to buy herself an inch of future. I have forgiven that version of myself. It's a start. I keep a photo on my desk of me and Della as kids, not the version my mother keeps on Facebook where we're smiling in pregnancy suits, but the one Aunt Sophia took on a storm night when the power went out and we hid under a quilt fort with a flashlight and a book. We're both open-mouthed in fake fear over a ghost story, Our eyes are bright and our hair is wild and our bellies are flat in ours. When I look at it, I think about thunder and how as a child it convinced me the house could split and we'd be swallowed by the crack. But every time the house held. It wasn't because the storm was kind. It was because the house was built with beams and nails that knew how to do their job. I am not a house, but I am learning to be beams and nails for myself. I am learning the sound of my own laugh when it isn't a cover. I am learning to say I love you and mean I love you, not what you do for me. I am learning to send flowers in congratulations when women choose themselves and casseroles in condolence when their families call them selfish for it. I am learning the difference between healing and erasure. I am learning slowly to believe that my life is not a courtroom in which I must constantly defend the right to be unbroken. Sometimes I hear a child's voice in the distance, at a park, on a bus, and for a second my body wants to rocket into that old choreography, wants to press the soft crown to my lips and rock and be the vessel my mother promised God I'd be. The wanting is not a trap anymore. It's a temperature. It rises and falls. I can want small hands to fit inside mine and still not belong to the ritual of being made useful. I can feel the ache and not call it destiny. I can hold my own face in the mirror and look at my own eyes and say, you are not a container. Last week, Emma sent me a photo she'd drawn in school. A stick figure holding a book in a court, a gavel in the other hand, hair drawn like the sun. She labeled it Aunt Maria Lawyer. Underneath, in 4 different colors, she wrote, I want to be a lawyer or a swimmer or a painter or a person who sits in the grass. I stuck it under a magnet shaped like a lemon. There's a bench on the edge of the city where the river pretends it's a lake. When the wind is right, the surface looks like glass freshly blown, still cooling into something you could drink from. I go there sometimes in the hour before dinner, when the western sky riots and settles. I sit and breathe in 2, 3, 4 and out 2, 3, 4, the way my mother taught me to breathe for a life I wasn't choosing. I do it for mine now. Across the water, I imagine another bench where a little girl sits with a sandwich bag of goldfish crackers and makes lists in her head not of baby names but of strange careers, volcanologist, beekeeper, civil engineer, woman who draws on sidewalks with chalk. She's learning a vocabulary my mother never spoke. She's learning no and later and mine and I don't know yet, and that those aren't failures of femininity but full sentences. I don't know what will happen with Della. I don't know if the part of her that's a chalice will ever choose to be a cup, or a mug, or nothing at all. I don't know if my mother will ever feel the shape of us and learn the edges are not knives but boundaries. I don't know whether I will ever want to raise a child in a house without a shrine. What I know is this. The knock at the door was not a knock, and I did not surrender the inch between gurney and bed. I carried it to a courthouse and set it on a table and said, this inch is mine. I watched a judge recognize the shape of it. I watched my mother's face when she realized the language she'd made for me would no longer be official, and I did not feel triumph. I felt a quiet like the inside of a shell when you put it to your ear and hear your own ocean. Healing, I am learning, is not a parade. It's a bench beside a river, a magnet holding up a crayon drawing, a voicemail saved of a little girl's whisper, I can be anything. It's eating grapes in a grocery store aisle with a nurse who reminds you that belief is not a miracle but a decision. It's breathing on purpose. It's telling the truth without apologizing for how loud it is. It's walking home with your keys in your own pocket and your hand open. At night before I sleep, I sometimes take down the mobile my mother left, the one with the tiny elephants. I touch each elephant to feel nothing sacred and everything ordinary. Then I hang it in the doorway on the way out of my bedroom and brush it with my shoulder as I pass so the bells chime. They are small and silly and cheap, and when they ring, they sound like something light being carried away by a breeze. I listen until they settle. Then I turn off the light, and the room is mine.